when I did come out, I was misgendered, insulted, abused, and made to hide my identity even in the place I was living, which only escalated my mental health issues. I had to fight on my own to get the help I needed, which is why I understand on a personal level how important it is to have support and people who will care for you instead of making trans people out to be the villains or implying our identities are not real or inappropriate in some way, because they aren't. Also, the way cis people refer to our bodies is appalling. Not only do they feel justified in judging our bodies and considering them gross, but they also think they have the right to interfere with how we transition, despite never listening to transgender individuals or being trans themselves. And not only that, they don't even have a concept of their own gender. A lot of them, if you talk to cis people, haven't even thought about it before. So not only are they trying to step into a field they have no business stepping into, but they're trying to control people's identities over things they haven't even had those real discussions with themselves, right? The ethicality of transgender rights is an important subject as trans people both in the US and around the globe face anti-trans propaganda and laws that the governments are forcing onto its citizens. In addition, the issues of misusing sources has led to a lot of problems and fear for transgender people and their in the youth. On March 1st, the Texas Attorney's General recent legal opinion that called transgender health care for minors child abuse, he cited sources in a misleading way and drew parallels that researchers say simply don't exist. Attorney General Keene Paxton issued a legal opinion on February 18th saying that certain types of gender-affirming health care, including puberty blockers and surgery, should be classified as child abuse when used for minors. In 2011 study, Dr. Cecilia Dejane, yeah, I'm going to spell it for you, Dhejane, a Stockholm-based researcher and her team cautioned against using the study to say that gender-affirming surgery is problematic or bad. They wrote that the study shows a need for even more support for trans people after surgeries because they do not always have a support system, which is just a single example of how he used research results and data to skew things in a way that suited him and serves to be misleading on purpose. Like, it's intentional. Then, several days later, Governor Greg Abbott issued a letter directing state agencies to investigate transgender health care for abuse. So, corruption, right? Alexander Stern said in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, if they knew anything about my scholarship more generally, they would know that I am someone whose research demonstrates the harm of the very types of policies they are trying to enact on marginalized people. Paxton's legal opinion on transgender youth uses misleading ... Alexandra Stern. Gender-affirming care can include a host of services, from counseling sessions to surgery. However, medical experts already recommend that bottom surgery be delayed until after a transgender person turns 18. In his non-binding opinion about declaring gender-affirming care abuse, Paxton cites several sources, including research articles, to bolster his arguments. Paxton takes the sources and uses them in misleading ways to support his argument against transgender youth. As a result, researchers have come out to say most of these citations were inaccurate and misleading. His sources were shaky at best and were either over-exaggerated or about something unrelated or just factually false. One researcher said Paxton distorted her work for political purposes and that she is mortified her research was being included in the opinion. Another example, Alexandra Mina Stern, a professional from Michigan who studies the history of forced sterilization, who was opposed to Paxton's parallels between forced sterilization and gender-affirming surgeries for minors. She states that she was opposed to this interpretation and that it did not align with her research and the conclusions of that research. Paxton also cited the work of Dr. Cecilia Dejane, I really need to look that up, to support the idea that gender-affirming health care could be harmful to transgender children. However, while she did not offer a response publicly in 2011, in the 2011 study that she was a part of, they concluded that trans people need more support, not less, as I stated earlier. As Paxton appealed the gender-affirming care order and referenced anti-trans hate groups, many other doctors and researchers also spoke up against him, supporting trans youth and their families, and being against the political figures getting involved with what should be a patient-doctor family situation. Paxton's legal opinion on trans people did not come out of nowhere. In August 2021, the Office of Abbott asked the state DFPS, Department of Family and Protective Services, to decide whether reassignment surgery for transgender youth constitutes child abuse. Several days later, they issued a letter that classified gender-affirming surgery as genital mutilation and child abuse. Right? Like, it's connected. In response, the DFPS's letter, the governor directed them to investigate any claims of such healthcare abuse and wrote that there could be criminal penalties for teachers, nurses, and doctors who do not report on transgender minors. They claimed that their reasoning was to protect children, cis ones, like the framing used when the Texas legislature passed the bill banning transgender students from participating in sport teams that align with their gender identity. Critics have rejected their transphobic framing. More than 30,000 people have signed a petition against the letter. In opinion, 5 Texas district attorneys issued a joint statement decrying the cruel directives. The American Civil Liberties Union called the directives and similar actions in other states part of a nationwide crisis of politicians using their power to attract trans kids, and a White House spokesperson denounced the decisions. The proponents of trans rights argue that trans people face discrimination in many different forms and push for more rights in education, including of the terms people use commonly but typically incorrectly. They start out by explaining the term sex, gender, its societal connotations, for example, man and woman, aka the gender binary, right? And what the word transgender means. While society still separates society by cis/binary men and women, it fails to be inclusive of trans and non-binary people, including intersex people. Like, it's very broad. It's, like, not as simple as they want it to be. Like, it's just not, and we've known that for years, right? In the article Transgender Equality, they define common terms. Sex is defined by the biological differences that are typically marked as female or intersex, female, male, or intersex at birth based on reproductive traits and assumed chromosomes and outward appearance. Gender refers to a range of societal and cultural norms associated with people, and is unique to each person, and depending on how they identify. Being trans refers to a person whose gender identity differs from the biological sex they were assigned at birth. The importance of the distinctions between sex and gender identity is critical to defining and expanding protections under anti-discrimination laws in the United States, especially as presidential administrations, state government officials, and the Supreme Court cases have continued to shift between giving and taking away trans rights. When the opponents attempt to scare parents into thinking that their child is trans, if their child is trans, they will not be able to help them by getting gender-affirming care, as it could constitute as child abuse, and they could lose their kid. They also try to extend this fear with the added threat of criminalizing penalties for teachers, nurses, and doctors who do not report on parents and trans kids. This puts trans individuals at risk for harm by those who they should be able to trust due to unjust, lawful opinions of conservative lawmakers. So parents will be forced to have to go through more drastic measures to make sure their kid is supported, and their trans child will be forced to experience even more traumatizing experiences than they already have and do.